Hello, welcome back to Supporting Students with Depression. In this section, we're going to look at measures that are often put in place when symptoms of depression are more pronounced and impactful. For lack of more advanced terminology, we'll just call this next level steps. First of all, at this point, you are going to have regular contact with the family. The type of contact will be agreed upon. Typically, it is recommended to stay in touch with the family, or at least somebody from your team, at least once a week, or if not every other week. Involvement in activities. Now, this will include community activities, so therefore it might require a team with the greater contacts if you're thinking in terms of having the student who is depressed involved in some type of jobs or volunteer work and stuff, which will be beneficial. This intervention certainly could be applied early on when noticing or in the reporting process or child find process, and probably it is better to do so. However, the reason it is put in next levels is because if the student is involved in such activities, it is really critical to keep that student involved in activities at this point. This will help immensely in the long run, and keeping the students involved in activities and what they're really doing in a normal life routine will help them move through depression and will speed up the recovery process. Interruption of inactivity and isolation. So this will take some, if they're older students, it's easier to slip into the cracks when there's multiple students or large number of students in a high school setting. But this is the same really type of premise as is connecting with the depressed student. But at this point, you are going to be a little bit more assertive with the intervention. You're going to try to do your best to keep the depressed students' energies up, maybe demanding or making a requirement they are involved with different social activities that happen at the school. At this point, too, I'd just like to point out that sometimes students will get in the habit of coming in, maybe putting their head down in sleeping. I have found that this is was not really good to permit this type of activity, because it will start a pattern that when they get used to sleeping, their bodies will tell them that it's good to sleep during this time period, and then they don't sleep at night, and then they'll sleep in school. So all this kind of goes with inactivity and isolation, and just to be mindful of it during your interactions with students. IEP services, once they start impacting performance, are generally considered at this point. And you will need to go through the appropriate chain of command and protocol for making referrals. Do you know your student assistant programming referral process? What services are available at school? Usually, this is the SAP team will decide on that, and your job will be just to referring them onto the SAP team. But it is also good just to have a kind of working knowledge about what is out there. So if a student with depression has IEP services, it is common that sometimes there'll be some type of skills that they will be working on. I found it beneficial to target some skills that will offset depression in some manner. And some of these include organizational skills, conflict resolution skills, and expanding the student's emotional vocabulary. So you may say to yourself, well, why the feeling vocabulary? Why is this important? And that is because depressed students have a tendency to want to label and define events all the same. And let's take, for example, they label everything horrible. Everything's horrible. Everything that happens to them from to minor and major is horrible. So when you start when they expand their vocabulary words to other types of feelings, disappointment, embarrassment, and so forth, this helps them calibrate events much better than when they just have one feeling and one vocabulary word. What will generally happen and is advised during the evaluation process is an FBA, but I mean, if it's not, maybe the team should consider. I would change that from maybe to strongly consider using an FBA or doing it for long-standing depression. And the reason is although the depressed student may initially been depressed, somewhere along the line they may have a payoff may have began to come forth regarding the reason for staying depressed. And that could be that it gives them attention. People come and they give them some type of sympathy, which is, could be a reinforcer, or they escape work. Now, I would like to point out that it would be a mistake to initially do this and dismiss, students' symptoms of depression as just simply a ploy to get attention or get out of doing something. But after a while, it's a good idea to at least roll out those factors and conduct a formal assessment. Psychotherapy and counseling is often implemented at this stage. Some evidence-based approaches, which are considered the gold standard in the counseling and psychotherapy field, mental health field in general, are cognitive behavioral therapy. An offshoot is dialectical behavior therapy, interpersonal therapy, problem-solving therapy, and solution-focused therapy. It is not necessarily to know all the ins and outs of those, but at least to be kind of familiar with what those practices are. Some examples of something that you might see in therapy that say a student who's depressed, a good student, is not making high honors and considers that to be the worst thing in the world, and is severely depressed, won't get out of bed, maybe won't go out socially. And so someone practicing cognitive behavior therapy might try to walk that student through if they can identify some things that happen to them that are worse, maybe that week or in their life. Maybe some things that are possibly worse, not making the honor roll, happen to other people. So generally, you're trying to kind of peck away and chip away at the rigid thinking that what happened to them is the worst possible thing that could happen. Another thing a therapist might do is kind of explore the student or any type of individual's depressed style of how they handle problems, not necessarily the content of the problem itself. And this would be kind of what maybe falls into the realm of problem-solving therapy, where somebody with the tendency to handle stuff in a real assertive, aggressive manner might be causing them more problems, and getting them to look at that and then working on changing that style. Psychotropic medications are usually not implemented solely by themselves. They're usually prescribed in conjunction with talk therapies, as previously described. They are prescribed by a doctor, licensed physician. And it's also important to keep in mind that people respond differently to different people respond differently to different medications. And so sometimes there is some trial that goes on until medications are adjusted right, and hence why it's under the care of a physician. Now, the short explanation of how psychotropic medications work is that that messages essentially are conveyed throughout our bodies via neurotransmitters. The cells don't connect. That the neurotransmitters help that message go from cell to cell. And that serotonin is one of these transmitters that help carry the messages associated with mood and emotions. And so what psychotropics helps the body regenerate those neurotransmitters to help convey more positive measures throughout the body. Again, that was a short synopsis of that. Lots of information out there that would explain that in more technical terms. Here are some of the more common psychotropic medications for depression. That would be Zoloft, Prozac, Celexa, Lexapro, Paxil, and Luvox, and some other things out there. But these are kind of the familiar, the more the ones that are prescribed more frequently. and a second or two just to take if you're interested in this. This will be in your handout regarding depression, regarding references for depression here. So feel free to look at that, and if you do so desire to dive deeper into the content. And that is the conclusion of our three-part series on approaches and considerations to support students exhibiting depression in the classroom.